the genetic upgrade of the human being. It's time to rise.
The whole idea of the fall, that people are fallen, who made that up? Maybe we're rising, maybe we're not fallen, but that just keeps everybody in their place believing they're fallen people, you know? And I think if we actually kind of pulled out from that thinking and saw, just really reframed who we are and reconceived who we are, like actually we're rising people, not fallen people.
This is what the so-called second coming actually is the awakening within each and every one of you of your own Christ consciousness, your own Buddha nature, your own Krishna spirit, your own holy Wavoka.
You have power. Exercise it.
There's no messianic return. It's a consciousness awakening that's happening in each person. This is a future that we create.
So religion's out. If we are going to be conscious, then religion's gone. Because we are amazing, infinite, eternal genius.
We'd all love to be gods, wouldn't we?
Psychological, you could say, we have buried inside of us archetypes, bits of the collective that are buried deep inside of us, and that there are ways to connect to these little fragments of the collective mind. And you know, many people have their own method for doing that. One of the methods to do that might be doing a ritual. And for a moment, allowing yourself to imagine that you're trying to talk to an extra-dimensional being. Aleister Crowley famously did one of these rituals and contacted I can't remember what the being was called, but it looks like a gray alien. This is before people were talking about gray aliens. Will you look that up?
Did he draw it?
He drew it. There's a drawing of it, yeah, and it looks like a gray alien.
What year was this?
It's like the 1800s.
Aleister Crowley was in the 1800s?
Yeah, right, 1900s.
Wow, look at that drawing by Aleister Crowley.
Yeah.
That does look like a gray alien.
Yeah, man.
Crowley drew this image in the early 1900s, before there were any depictions of gray aliens in modern culture, and before there were any UFO sightings or abductions in the Western world. Later on, Crowley and his associates would attempt other experiments and rituals, hoping to initiate contact with these beings. Shortly after those rituals, the world was flooded with UFO sightings and alien abductions.
The craters and mountains of our moon bear the names of giants of science, figures like Archimedes, Kepler, and Copernicus. There is also a crater honoring someone called Jack Parsons. There are some who would rather he had been forgotten. Perhaps that's why his crater is on the dark side of the moon.
He was a maverick rocket scientist, okay? He was also a maverick rocket scientist spiritually.
This father of American rocketry was also an occultist, devoted to a path still widely misunderstood and feared.
So the founding of modern rocket science is absolutely allied and connected with black magic.
Only its detractors would call it black magic. For Parsons, this was his spiritual path, as it is for its initiates today. His scientific legacy continues. So does the puzzle of his death. On June 17, 1952, at 5:08 in the evening, a powerful explosion shook tranquil Pasadena, California, and so ended the life of 38-year-old Jack Parsons.
We're not here to discuss rocket science, because the most fascinating aspect of Parsons' life was his obsession with the occult and his dedication to high ritual magic, as well as his association with Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard and the beast himself, Aleister Crowley. So today, we're going to discuss the work that changed Parsons' life, and very well it may have been a factor in his death, a ritual that was called the Babylon Working. So in 1939, Parsons converted to Thelema, Aleister Crowley's religion. But see, in 1946, the pair embarked on the Babylon working, based on ideas that were pioneered by Aleister Crowley in his 1917 book, Moonchild. The Babylon working was a series of high ceremonial magic rituals conducted by Parsons and Hubbard between January and March of 1946 in the Mojave Desert. Now, the objective of the rituals was to manifest an incarnation of the elemental spirit of the divine feminine archetype known as the Scarlet Woman or Babylon. Now, Parsons, with Hubbard and Marjorie Cameron, whom Parsons married in 1946, they then move on to the next phase of the rituals and attempt to produce a child by means of sex magic. And even though no child was conceived, Parsons still regarded the rituals as a success. Now, during the entire course of the Babylon working, Parsons had maintained constant correspondence with the aging Aleister Crowley, and in many regards, Parsons was being groomed to become Crowley's successor. Marjorie, for her part, remarked that neither Parsons nor Hubbard were the same after the Babylon working. She claimed that it changed these men. Hubbard developed a paralysis on the right side of his body due to the ritual, and after he recovered, he became almost overcome with this energy, and it seemed that he was accessing an intellect that wasn't really his own. Then this may have been the result of some kind of experiment they were working with these high magic practices. Now, soon thereafter, Hubbard channeled the bulk of his energy into his book Dianetics and the fledgling Scientology movement. Now, Parsons, on the other hand, seemed to follow down a darker path, continuing his magical pursuits. And though the Babylon working ritual had been completed to fruition, the chain reaction of the work had yet to fully manifest. And mere months before his death, Parsons wrote that he would be consumed by fire, and he was willing to be the supreme sacrifice in honor of Babylon. He foresaw that an ending was growing near. As such, it could very likely be the end of his existence. In 1952, Parsons died at the age of 37 years old in a laboratory explosion in his own home. Now, this attracted the attention of the national media. The police would rule it an accident, but people that knew Jack Parsons suspected suicide or assassination. Now, Parsons' mother, upon hearing the news, committed suicide herself. Now, to add to all of this, it's also been speculated by those in the UFO community and some in the religious community that the Babylon working is directly responsible for the UFO flap that followed. As it was within the same year that the ritual concluded, Crowley died, the Roswell crash occurred, and then the flap of UFOs followed in the 1950s. This leads some to conclude that these beings that we assume to be extraterrestrials are in fact some type of other entity, perhaps even demonic in the guise of alien.
You've been looking at this phenomenon for a long time. You've worked closely with Dr. Alan Hynek and other UFO researchers. You've written many authoritative books, and yet your perspective on the UFO issue seems rather unique in the sense that you don't seem to be jumping on the extraterrestrial visitors bandwagon.
I think what the UFO phenomenon is teaching us is that we don't understand time and space.
Mm-hmm.
Here are objects, I think we have to call them objects, that are physical, that interact with the environment, that cause effects on the witnesses, on the psychology and the physiology of the witnesses, and leave traces on the ground, and yet are capable of, appear to be capable of manipulating time and space in ways that go beyond what our physics understands today.
In your books, particularly your most recent book, Messengers of Deception, which is many years old, you suggest that UFOs are deliberately trying to manipulate our subconscious mind to create a mythology in our culture about themselves, which is one of the reasons that they're both physical and concrete, yet very elusive at the same time. Do you still feel that way?
During the Watergate investigation, it was discovered that there was a plan originated in the White House to surface a submarine off the coast of Cuba and paint the second coming of Christ over the island of Cuba using holograms, which is well within our technology today. The idea was that since there is a large Catholic population in Cuba, they would be so upset by this vision that this would saturate the communication channels, the telephone system in Cuba, long enough for an invasion to take place.
how interesting. I've never heard of that.
Well, I think that's a classic in psychological warfare, but that kind of manipulation is well understood, and I have personally investigated several apparently genuine UFO cases where there was in fact a manipulation. My conclusion, the conclusion of scientists working with me, was that there was in fact a manipulation taking place, and that it was not a hoax on the part of the witnesses, but a hoax on the part of somebody much better organized than them.
He's the Las Vegas man who claims he can summon UFOs on command. Pretty wild. So we sent Action News reporter Mike Dellastreto to get the real story. But what he found shocked everyone and could leave you wondering, are UFOs real?
All right, guys, just listen up here. This guy says the Old Testament, written in Hebrew, taught him how to summon UFOs. All right, he says he can also do this on command, and he adds he's been doing it for 25 years, keeping all of it secret until now.
These beings are here. They are here. They're just sitting right up there.
We met up with Prophet Yahweh, seer of Yahweh, at Doolittle Park off Lake Mead. We picked the day, we picked the time, and we picked the location.
Everyone's going to think you're absolutely nuts.
Well, I thought I was absolutely nuts.
Until he says he saw UFOs. Over the years, 1,500 of them.
Can we make it 1,501 today? What do you think?
I'll try it.
He says the voice in his head told him to go public now, so we took him up on his offer, and we scanned the skies. Nothing but a few clouds. When the prophet started praying for a sighting, I wasn't exactly convinced.
I pray, oh Yahweh, that you send a sighting so that they know that I am not mentally ill. I am not a false prophet, like those who seek to kill me say I am.
I see something straight up.
Oh, brother, look at it. There it is.
You can barely see it, a white speck. Then another sighting.
There it is. I got it. I got it. I got it. I got it.
Photojournalist Jonathan Hawkins locks in on it. Let's take a closer look here. It's an orange sphere that appeared out of nowhere. I call the boss with an unexpected change in my story.
I can see it clear as day. In fact, it's bright.
I can't believe this.
It's moving pretty fast.
It's going to Nellis Air Force Base. It wants to be seen.
We called Nellis to see what these things might be. Guess what? They didn't call us back. But this thing started coming back toward us.
It's coming toward us now, I think.
What?
See, it's coming up toward us.
Whoa, man! Oh, hallelujah!
Then, a few seconds later, it disappeared.
It's going back up in space.
Prophet Yahweh isn't concerned. He says it'll be back. And I'm still not quite sure what those things were. Now, if I didn't see this for myself, I probably would have just laughed this whole thing off. Prophet Yahweh says, though, this is just the beginning. He says we're going to see a lot more of these things starting next week. And he says one will come down low enough for all of Las Vegas to see.
Now, if we take all of this information and piece it together, we can understand that there is a collective subconscious in which all of our minds interact with, and that inside this collective subconscious are archetypes which can manifest and express in our world, as Jung would have put it. And as Jacques Vallée said, the UFO phenomenon also has a consciousness aspect to it, wherein whatever these beings or entities are, apart from the obvious government, technology, and psychological operations, they are trying to manipulate our perception so that we work them into our reality. And ritual magic, psychology, and science on the quantum level are all using the same basis for their practices, and that is consciousness and how it interacts or interfaces with the universe and its varying dimensions. And in those dimensions can exist archetypes, thoughts, or entities. And whether it be through ritual magic, psychology, or quantum science, we can contact these entities and summon them into our reality.
This week in our series of reports on UFOs, we learned a number of things. That not everybody who sees a UFO is crazy, that our government has lied about UFO information, that it's withheld UFO files, and even spied on UFO witnesses. We've also heard from scientists who say life elsewhere in the universe is virtually a certainty. And we heard that a majority of Americans believe that UFOs are real and come from space. Tonight, in part 5 of his report, George Knapp introduces us to a local man with an amazing and disturbing story. George.
Gary and Mary Ruth, we've been working on this story for a long time, and we'll tell you right up front that it's going to be hard to swallow at first. This week, we've heard the contention of UFO researchers that there's a secret government within our government.
There's a secret government within our government.
While that may be hard to believe coming from the UFO perspective, we've certainly learned in Watergate and the Iran-Contra scandal that factions within our government can and do pursue their own hidden agendas outside of the law, outside the control of Congress, or the knowledge of the American people. This is exactly the type of operation we'll hear about tonight. It's a chilling scenario with worldwide implications that may have its roots right here.
President Obama says that there is footage and records of objects in the skies, these unidentified aerial phenomenon, and he says we don't know exactly what they are. What do you think that it is?
I would ask him again. Thank you.
When it comes to aliens, there's some things I just can't tell you on air.
When it comes to aliens, there's some things I just can't tell you on air.
But what is true, and I'm actually being serious here, is that there's footage and records of objects in the skies that we don't know exactly what they are. We can't explain how they moved, their trajectory.
We're back with President Bill Clinton, James Patterson. All right, President Clinton, first things first before we move on. UFOs. You've been the president. You've seen all the info. Are they real?
You know, they've given us an idea for our next book.
Well, what do you know? What can you tell us?
The truth is that we've never proved one, but there are things flying around up there that we haven't fully identified yet. And keep in mind, there are basically 1 billion galaxies in an ever-expanding universe. I mean, you can't even get your mind around the sheer number of things that are out there.
But you've seen this.
And
you've seen the data.
Well, no one knows, but I think that the probability is that there's something you would call life somewhere else.
Something you would call life somewhere else. All right, and this is
Inside the walls of this castle, an unassuming Jesuit from Argentina leads the Vatican astronomical research and has recently caused an uproar by opening a debate about aliens.
In a universe so big, huge, I would say, as the one where we live, with 100 billion of galaxies, with each galaxy with 100 billion of stars. Probably with many of these stars having planets, it would be possible that life could evolve as the way we know on Earth.
Father Funes says he is not sure if other forms of life would be more or less intelligent than humans, but he is convinced that the existence of aliens is not a contradiction with the Catholic faith.
When I was a corporate manager of Fairchild Industries in 1974 through 77, I met the late Dr. Werner von Braun in early 74. At that time, von Braun was dying of cancer, but he assured me that he would live a few more years in order to tell me about the game that was being played, that game being the effort to weaponize space, to control the Earth from space and space itself. Von Braun's purpose in life during the last years of his life, his dying years, was to educate the public and decision makers about why space-based weapons are a dumb, dangerous, destabilizing, too costly, unnecessary, unworkable, undesirable idea. The strategy that Wernher von Braun taught me was that first the Russians are going to be considered to be the enemy. In fact, when I met him in '74, they were the enemy, the identified enemy. We were told that they had killer satellites. We were told that they were coming to get us and control us, the dirty commies, that whole story. First, the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons. Then terrorists would be identified, and that was soon to follow. We heard a lot about terrorism. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern. But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would be needing to build space-based weapons. And the next enemy was asteroids. Now at this point, he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids we're going to build space-based weapons. So it was funny then. And the funniest one of all was against what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final card. And over and over and over during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens. And all of it, he said, is a lie.
All of it, he said, is a lie.
The affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations.
After 1989, President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
Never before has a new world order had to be assembled from so many different perceptions, or on so global a scale. Nor has any previous order had to combine the attributes of the historic balance of power system with global democratic opinion and the exploding technology of the contemporary period.
At any rate, we know about the Gnostics from their own words now, because a library of Gnostic texts was found at Nag Hammadi, near Dendera in Upper Egypt, where we have a marvelous temple of Hathor at Dendera in Upper Egypt. And these Nag Hammadi texts, the discovery in 1945 is quite an interesting story, actually. An Egyptian peasant is out preparing one of his fields, and he finds some earthenware jars hidden beneath a stone. And they're full of these codices, they're full of these books. And he doesn't know what they are. He takes them home. His mother burns a couple of them for kindling in the stove. And then he begins to realize they might be valuable, and they're sold out on the black market. Eventually they're all collected together, and we now have the entire corpus of what is called the Nag Hammadi Library, which was it's very fortunate that we do, because from those we can understand what Gnosticism was really about. They knew they were being persecuted, they knew the end were coming, they hid these texts as a sort of time capsule, and it was found in 1945. Well, I'm not going to go in detail into Gnostic cosmology, but the Gnostics envisaged a realm that they called the pleroma, which was the all. This is where God belonged, as they saw it. This was the divine. And moving in the pleroma were the ions, the aeons. One can think of them almost like the ancient Egyptian deities, these spirits, these powers of creation. And one of them is the goddess Sophia. And Sophia envisages, she dreams, and she envisages the anthropos. She envisages